Hey everybody, this is the Sliders Review, and I'm here today to talk to you about, did The Last of Us video game creators rip off the Walking Dead Telltale games? So this has been a debate for a couple of years now, where many people suggest that one of the two video games ripped off the other person. Did they, or is it just a coincidence and everything? Now, you have to keep in mind that this is a monster apocalypse show. Therefore, there's gonna be certain similarities. There are formulas in which an apocalyptic monster show or movie has to follow and everything. It's just the format of things. You're always gonna have the monster trying to kill people. You're always gonna have that hothead that like messes things up. You're always gonna have cannibals and everything. I mean, heck, look at Van Helsing. It was a sci-fi show that came out just a few years ago, and it's based on a comic. However, it's completely different from the comic. To the point when you watch it, you can clearly tell they based their vampire apocalyptic show off of The Walking Dead. There are way too many similarities and stuff. And this is the same thing when it comes to The Last of Us and Walking Dead Telltale game. There are just way too many similarities not to consider this to be a coincidence. And there are tons of The Last of Us like gamers that be all like, oh, people are just looking too hard than it is. Nobody ripped off nobody. Our game is amazing and blah 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 blah. You cannot deny the coincidences and similarities in both these games. But the question is, did one of them rip the other person off? Is it an homage? Is it just a coincidence and everything? It's debatable. It's hard to determine if it was a ripoff or not, or if it was an homage. Now, one thing eagle-eyed viewers realized was Clementine's house in that of The Last of Us. And it was all her house, along with her in it, was also in something else, something beyond something, I can't remember what it was called. But like, you can clearly tell, okay, that's an Easter egg. Therefore, the developers saw the Last of Us developers saw the Walking Dead Telltale game and was all like, hey, let's throw this in as an Easter egg and everything. And the first game of The Walking Dead came out a year before that of The Last of Us. So they had time to watch the game, see what happens in it, and throw in little Easter eggs here and there. It happens, you know what I'm saying? Like if you watch Star Trek First Contact, the movie, in that movie, you will see the Star Wars Millennium Falcon really far away in the distance doing like the battle between the Borg and Starfleet. And so, Easter eggs are always there, it's apparent. But what's also apparent is people copying from another property and stuff. How many times have you seen like a comic book come out, then years later, a similar comic book comes out, but from a completely different company? Similar characters, similar villains, movies, TV shows that are similar to each other. And you gotta remember about leakers, scoopers, and that of moles and everything. And so when people create things, I bet you anything, there are like leakers that leak things to certain other people. It gets back to other people, and then they start creating it on their own and stuff. And like it's just like the whole mole thing. Oh, put a mole in this situation and they'll leak information to somebody else. It does happen in the entertainment business. But the question is, did The Last of Us rip off that of the Walking Dead Telltale game? How could it be when it was just a year apart from each other? With that of The Last of Us coming out in 2013 and The Walking Dead coming out in 2012. So, The Last of Us will have to be doing their writing and development and stuff like that years prior, right? So those people assume that there's no way The Last of Us copied The Walking Dead because of the simple fact they was doing things in development by the time, whatchamacallit game came out. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? In fact, The Last of Us was created by Naughty Dog, and they started the development of The Last of Us in 2009. All the way back then, they was coming up with characters, writing out plot scenarios, getting the graphics done and stuff like that. Basically, the creators decided to split Uncharted teams up. So one worked on Uncharted 3 while the other worked on The Last of Us. So if this was in production ever since 2009, but we don't know exactly the details of the production of when characters were created, when plot scenarios were written out, when action sequences were done, this and that. But we know it's from a time span of 2009 to that of 2000 and at least 12 or so. And let's not forget, The Last of Us game was delayed for about what was it, a month or a year or something like that. Now, when it comes to the Walking Dead Telltale games, they've been in development ever since 2011. And so most likely the people over at Telltale Games and Warner Bros. And this and that, they probably overheard that Naughty Dog is gonna make a zombie apocalypse show and everything. And so they decided to try to beat them to the punch, which they actually did. Things like this, like I said before, has happened before. There's a movie called Totally Killer on Amazon Prime. It's a time-traveling slasher comedy. Well, Netflix made their own time travel slasher movie. And it came out after Totally Killer. Problem is, the Netflix movie was completed years before Totally Killer came out. They just shelved it and everything, giving Totally Killer and Amazon Prime time to hear about this time traveling slasher movie and create theirs first. And so this is what I believe happened with the Walking Dead Telltale games. They heard that Sony and Naughty Dog was making a zombie apocalypse video game, so they beat them to the punch. Their game coming out in about about 4 or 5 episodic episodes in 2012. And so with this, this gave Naughty Dog and Sony and stuff plenty of time to hear details, leaks and stuff from the Walking Dead game, and to actually watch the Walking Dead game themselves. Because you gotta remember, I don't know how long it takes to make animation for video games, but it must take a very long time. And so the fact that it literally took the Walking Dead people a year to make their video game, but their Telltale game looks completely different than that of The Last of Us. Different graphics, this and that. Who is to say that the people at Naughty Dog didn't watch the cutscenes or play the game from The Walking Dead? Be like, hey, you know what? I like this, I like that. Let's craft our story to be more like them, but of course differently. Because think about it, they added Clementine's house into their video game and everything. Now, I don't know. So the very first The Last of Us video game, the whole Clementine house thing. So Bill was a character from the first game. And so in his town, there's a house that looks very strikingly similar, not exactly the same, but similar to that of Clementine's house and everything. The pool, the house, the window, the interior. It is a nod and homage, if you will, of that of Clementine's house. And that's a cool little Easter egg and stuff. So that tells you they played the video game, they saw Clementine's house, and they're all kind of like, hey, let's duplicate this right down to the tree house of all things. And how often do you see a tree house in a person's neighborhood or backyard or whatever? Like, I haven't seen a tree house in years until these people who live adjacent from me on another street, like, built one for their kid. And so if they're willing to take her house and duplicate it for their video game, who is to say they didn't duplicate other stuff? And this is where the similarities come about. Now, I've never played neither one of these video games. However, I have watched the entire cutscene series of the Walking Dead Telltale games years ago. I've never watched a cutscene from that of The Last of Us, but I've watched the television series. And it was in season 2, episode 2, that I started to think to myself, hey, Ellie is starting to remind me a little bit of Clementine. Just a little bit with the whole... Oh, by the way, this has spoilers for The Last of Us Season 2. So, here we go. Joel dies in the second episode, leaving Ellie by herself. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, that's kind of a coincidence. Like, Clementine lost Lee at the end of season 1 of Telltale games, and she had to go off by herself and everything. And then I started to think, there's other little similarities in both these video games. Like, similarities, not an exact like copy, but just similarities and everything. So here are some of those similarities. Well, Clementine and Ellie themselves. So both start off as little girls and everything, and both are like, abandoned and found by a man. This man takes them in and kind of like adopts them and show them the ropes and everything. Then, like, both male adoptees die and everything, leaving these girls on their own to survive. And I just find it peculiar that, both series starts off with a male adult lead, being Lee and being Joel. Then they just happen to die. And then, like, towards the second season or in the second season, and then the show shifts focus to the new protagonist that happens to be a little girl who is now growing up in a zombie apocalypse and everything. I just thought that was kind of interesting and odd how, like, when you watch these games or, like, show or whatever, it starts off with the male lead and then it goes to that of, like, the young female lead and everything. And it's just kind of like, they could have had a young male lead to be different from the other video game, but for whatever reason, they chose a young female protagonist and a lead male protagonist. Also, both Ellie and Clementine are part of the LGBT community. However, in all fairness, I'll have to give it credit this time to The Last of Us, because they established that Ellie was, like, a lesbian from, like, the start. Well, somewhere in the video game when they did that, it's like a tie-in video game to it or something like that, or like an unlockable character or something like that, where it's determined that, she had, like, this girlfriend back in the day, and the girlfriend and her was hanging out. And then they both get bit. But then that's when Ellie realized she's immune and stuff like that. It wasn't revealed until many years later that like Clementine is part of the LGBT community. So, that right there is just a coincidence and stuff. Or maybe the people from Telltale saw that, hey, if The Last of Us gonna take from us, why don't we take a little from them? So, of course, Lee and Joel, both guys are like introduced to like the viewer. And while both guys' personalities are completely different, like Lee is a heck of a lot more nicer than Joel. Joel's a heck of a lot meaner, but both men have killed. Remember, when Lee started off, he was in handcuffs, and arrested because he killed his wife's lover and everything. Then, of course, the whole zombie apocalypse thing happened. Joel, him and his family tried to flee as the military was trying to kill the infected. And then his daughter dies, and he gets separated from his brother, and he starts to be a more grumpier person. Both these men find two little girls, Clementine and Ellie. And so what's interesting after that is that, they kind of don't want to take them in, but then they do take them in because they realize, they need them. Joel has an ulterior motive. They both have to take these girls across either the country or like the state. Lee takes Clementine to try and find her parents. Joel has to take Ellie to go and find like these group of people known as the Fireflies and these scientists to try to stop the zombie apocalypse. It's just interesting how both males adopted these two little girls and had to like trek across like, tons of miles just to get them to a certain location for a very important reason. And what's even more jarring is that at the end of season 1, in the last episode of Telltale Games from The Walking Dead, Lee gets bit and he has to die and everything. This was very shocking because he was the Rick Grimes of the show. So you would assume he would have been in season after season after season. But the dude dies at the end of season 1, legit leaving Clementine all by herself. Then you have Joel from The Last of Us. Now, he survived season 1, but because of his actions at the season finale, it leads him to die very early in the second episode of like the television series in season 2. I don't know exactly when he dies in the video game, but season 2 of The Last of Us, it started development in 2014 and did not come out until 2020, giving them plenty of time to see what happened in The Walking Dead and add it to their story. More so, the Abby character. Now, you might be thinking there is no like Abby character in the Walking Dead Telltale game, but there kinda is. There is the Stranger. And the Stranger, see what happened was Lee and Clementine stole supplies from the Stranger and his family. It resulted in his wife and his daughter dying. So he wanted revenge on Lee by kidnapping that Clementine and was gonna raise her as his own, and he's completely crazy in the head. This happens towards the end of season 1 of The Walking Dead. Abby is nowhere to be shown in season 1 of The Last of Us. However, Joel killed her father in cold blood because he was going to experiment on that of Ellie to try to find a cure for the zombie apocalypse. This resulted in season 2 of Abby wanting revenge on Joel. Similar how the Stranger wanted revenge on Lee and everything, causing her to kill that of Joel and becoming an enemy of that of Ellie and stuff. And if that's not a coincidence, boy, I don't know what is, because that can't be no coincidence. It just can't be no coincidence and everything. Like people say, oh, it's just a coincidence. No, it's not a coincidence. Think about it. The second season didn't come out until 2020. It didn't start development until 2014. They watched the game. They had plenty of time to figure out who they're going to cherry pick from The Walking Dead and then add it to their game and stuff. Then there's Abby's appearance that looks very similar to Jane. At some point in time, Abby starts to look like this with really choppy hair, who looks very similar to that of Jane from the Walking Dead Telltale games. Jane has always had this short, choppy type hair, and it's just too much. This can't be no coincidence and everything that she looks almost identical to like Jane. And of course, Jane was already established way before Abby was ever created. I mean, come on, people. I know you love the Last of Us video game, but come on, this ain't no coincidence and stuff. Now, these next two things could very well just be a coincidence. Then again, you don't know. They could have, like, saw what happened in The Walking Dead, decided to tweak their story and refine it. Who knows? This could just be a coincidence. And that is Bill and Kenny. Bill and Kenny are very similar to each other. Both are redneck hicks. Both do not like Lee and are very temperamental towards him and stuff. Like Kenny don't like Lee and Bill does not like Joel. Now, what's interesting about both these guys is that their significant other who they married died because of circumstances and stuff. Kenny's wife died and Bill's husband died. Well, at least Bill's husband died in the show. I know they changed things around from the video game and the show, but nevertheless, Bill's significant other did die and everything. And so what is it? I'm trying to think. But yeah, it's just really interesting that when it comes to those two, that both are these mountain men, redneck type hicks. Both of them are very temperamental. Both of them do not like the lead protagonist or the lead male protagonist and stuff. But both guys do have a bit of a soft side. Now in the show, once again, the show has had plenty of time to change things from the Last of Us video game, see what happens in the Walking Dead Telltale game, and kind of change things ever so slightly. And so you see Bill's a little bit, has a bit of a softer side in the show than what he does in the video game and stuff. And so we know Kenny also later on has a softer side and everything and starts to be a nicer person until situations start to happen and bad things start to happen and everything. Now there are cannibals in both video games. That's just a coincidence, you know what I'm saying? That's your standard monster apocalypse type thing, is to have a cannibal episode. Now, another thing that might just be a pure coincidence and everything is Duck and that of Sam. Both are two young little boys who befriend the young female protagonist and stuff. And sadly, both end up getting bit and, and end up dying and stuff. I just find it odd that both just happen to be young boys, both just happen to be friends of the female protagonist, and both happen to be bit and die. So could be a coincidence, could not be. Who knows, But it's just like I said, this whole thing could just be a coincidence, or it could not be. The whole fact that they put Clementine's house in the Last of Us video game shows that they know exactly what happened in the Walking Dead Telltale game. And because of that house, because of that one house that happens to have a pool and a tree house and everything, and a similar back porch like glass door, it started to make people wonder, could this all just be a coincidence, or did they legit just rip off and change things around? I mean, heck, look at Harry Potter and the Worst Witch. J.K. Rowling and everything legit took inspiration from the Worst Witch. There are so many details from the Worst Witch that is in Harry Potter, but just been reworked and twisted around to fit the narrative of Harry Potter. It happens, you know what I'm saying? Some people just rip things off and everything. And they just change things around to make their story better because they know the audience likes this other thing. And if they like this other thing, then they're hoping that they will like their property. Look at The Rock and Black Adam. When Black Adam came out, so many people was all like, well, this happened in this other superhero movie, that happened in that other superhero movie, because they literally copied and paste from other movies, hoping, banking that people will like what they saw in those other movies, and then will hopefully like in their movie and stuff. Alrighty, well, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.